I knew the day was going downhill the second I saw Whitney Naylor's beige Lexus blocking my garage. The same Whitney Naylor who chaired our HOA board with the grace of a jackhammer and the charm of a wasp nest. She always had something to complain about: my grass being half an inch too high, my porch light being too bright, or my daughter's chalk art being an eyesore to the community. And now, she had the nerve to park her smug HOA mobile directly in front of my garage. I stood there for a solid 10 seconds, keys in hand, staring at her car like it had personally insulted my mother. I had just finished a 12-hour shift. I'm a night dispatcher at the hospital, and all I wanted was to pull into my garage, make a sandwich, and not deal with Whitney's nonsense. Instead, I pulled up behind her car, angled just enough to block her in completely, and killed the engine. I didn't have to wait long. Not 10 minutes later, I heard the clack of heels on pavement and the unmistakable voice of Whitney screeching across the driveway. "Harrison, Harrison Newell. Move your car this instant." I leaned against my driver's side door, arms crossed. "Oh hey, Whitney, didn't see you there. Something wrong, you're blocking me in," she snapped, as if I'd just stolen her identity. "This is harassment." "I had a meeting." "You blocked my garage," I said, nodding toward my driveway. "That's trespassing." She threw her hands in the air. "I'm the HOA chair. I was doing inspections. I'm allowed to park wherever I need to." I tilted my head. "Even if it's on my property." Whitney's face flushed pink. "You're being incredibly difficult right now. This is not what community cooperation looks like, Harrison." I pulled out my phone and walked over to the edge of my driveway. "See this?" I pointed to the curb, where a bright red "No Parking Fire Lane" line was freshly painted. "Repainted it last week. City ordinance. And this driveway, that's mine. You're double parked on private property and in a fire lane." Whitney's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. I was only going to be a minute." "You've been here for over an hour," I said, showing the time-stamped footage from my security camera. "I called the tow truck 20 minutes ago." Her voice jumped an octave. "You did what?" "Yep, they're on their way. Should be any minute now." Her expression twisted into something between a snarl and a nervous twitch. "You'll regret this." I shrugged. If I had a nickel for every time someone from the HOA said that, I'd buy the whole block and evict the board. She stomped back to her car and yanked the driver's side door. Locked. Then she turned and glared at me like I had summoned Beelzebub himself. "You're violating HOA policies by retaliating against board members," I laughed. "Actually, I pulled the bylaws last week. There's nothing about blocking in illegally parked cars, but there is a clause about HOA members abusing their authority." I paused, watching her face twitch again. "And I've got 3 neighbors who saw you park here. That's enough for a complaint." Right on cue, the tow truck rumbled around the corner, bright yellow and beautiful. Whitney's face paled. "You wouldn't." I didn't even have to answer. The driver hopped out, looked at me, then at the Lexus. "You called about the fire lane block?" he asked. "Yup," I said, handing him the printed timestamp photo. Whitney clutched her purse like it held the last scraps of her dignity. "This is a misunderstanding. I'm HOA." The driver looked unimpressed. "Ma'am, that means nothing to the city. You're parked illegally." As he started hooking her car up, Whitney turned back to me, seething. "You'll be hearing from the board." "Looking forward to it," I said, pulling a lawn chair from the garage. "I've been meaning to bring up a few things myself." HOA story, HOA stories, Homeowners Association stories. Whitney's Lexus was gone. Hauled off like yesterday's trash, while she stood there gripping her empty key fob like it might bring the car back through sheer willpower. The tow truck rumbled away, and Whitney finally spun back toward me. Her jaw flexed, her nostrils flared. "You've made a dangerous mistake." I leaned back in the chair and stretched my legs with exaggerated ease. "You keep saying that like it's supposed to scare me." She didn't respond. Just turned on her heel and stormed away, heels clicking like a metronome of fury. I watched her disappear around the corner, then stood, grabbed my chair, and finally pulled my car into the garage. Inside, my daughter Emmy was at the kitchen table with her chemistry set, goggles on, eyebrows furrowed in concentration. "Was that the HOA lady again?" she asked without looking up. She parked in front of the garage. I handled it. Emmy grinned without breaking focus. "Did you use science?" "Nope, just the law." She nodded approvingly, as if that were an acceptable alternative, then went back to measuring something in milliliters. I grabbed a sandwich and my laptop, still running on adrenaline, and pulled up the HOA's website. I had a feeling this wasn't over. And I was right. The next morning, a bright yellow citation was taped to my front door. I peeled it off and scanned it. Violation: obstruction of HOA member in official duties. Official duties, my ass. Attached was a fine. $450, due in 5 days. I didn't even blink. I opened my filing cabinet and pulled out my folder labeled HOA Idiocy. I had been keeping records for 6 months. Copies of every notice, every text Whitney had sent to the neighborhood group chat that towed the line of legality, every time she entered someone's yard without permission to inspect. It was time to start putting the puzzle together. That afternoon, I visited my neighbor Lewis. He was a quiet guy, mid-50s, former Marine, and the only person in the neighborhood who'd openly told Whitney to back off once, when she tried to fine him for having a flagpole. "You get one of these?" I asked, holding out the citation. Lewis took it, scanned it, and snorted. "She's getting desperate. She's abusing the bylaws. Want to help me do something about it?" He didn't hesitate. "Absolutely." Over the next few days, we quietly built our case. I wrote a formal complaint to the city's Code Enforcement Division. Lewis contacted a friend at the district attorney's office. Meanwhile, I collected statements from 8 other residents, all of whom had been fined or harassed by Whitney for things that weren't violations, things like leaving a garden hose out or having unapproved Halloween decorations. Then came the email. It popped into my inbox late Friday evening. No subject line, no signature, just, "You're not going to win. I have friends on the board, friends in the city. You'll be sorry." I screenshotted it, saved it in 3 different places, and forwarded it to my contact at the city. Saturday morning, I put my plan into motion. I called for a special meeting of the HOA. According to the bylaws, if 1/5 of the homeowners signed a petition, we could force a meeting within 10 days. I got the signatures in too. Most people didn't need convincing. Whitney had made plenty of enemies. We reserved the local rec center, neutral ground, cameras. Chairs for the board and residents. I printed copies of everything: emails, photos, signed statements. I even had a spreadsheet showing all the fines Whitney had issued in the past year, cross-referenced with actual violations. 73% of them weren't supported by any bylaw. When the meeting day came, I arrived early with Lewis and a few others. We set up a projector, had coffee and donuts, made it feel welcoming. Whitney arrived second to last, eyes darting, mouth tight. "Well, this is dramatic," she said, arms folded. "Just a community discussion," I replied. The last person to arrive was a woman in a gray blazer with a city badge clipped to her lapel. She took a seat in the back, silent, taking notes. I didn't introduce her. Didn't have to. I opened the meeting with a brief statement. "We're here to review the conduct of the HOA board, particularly Chairwoman Whitney Naylor, regarding the issuance of fines and the enforcement of regulations not supported by our governing documents." Whitney interrupted. "This is out of order." "You don't have authority to." A man in a blue windbreaker stood. Jerry, one of the residents who'd been fined for having a hummingbird feeder. "We followed procedure. You're out of order." The room murmured in agreement. Whitney sat slowly, like she was trying not to fall into a trap she hadn't seen until it was too late. I went through the evidence methodically, showed the discrepancy between actual bylaws and the fines, played video footage of Whitney entering backyards uninvited, read aloud her email. When I finished, I turned to the back of the room. The woman in the blazer stood. "My name is Dana Mercer. I'm an investigator with the city's Code Enforcement Division. I've been reviewing the materials provided to me by Mr. Newell and others." Based on what I've seen here today, I'll be launching a formal investigation into the actions of this HOA and its leadership. Whitney shot to her feet. You can't be serious. This is a personal vendetta. Dana's voice was flat. You misused your authority, issued baseless fines, and intimidated residents. That's a violation of municipal code. If we find evidence of financial misconduct like collecting fines without proper documentation, we'll refer the case to the district attorney. The room went dead quiet. Whitney's face drained of color. I need to speak to my lawyer, she whispered. You can do that, Dana said, but you'll do it after we've taken your records. She gestured to a second woman waiting near the door who stepped forward with a clipboard and a sealed evidence bag. Lewis looked over at me and nodded once. We'd done it. The board voted that night unanimously to suspend Whitney pending the outcome of the investigation. The HOA's vice chair, an older woman named Bernice who mostly kept to herself, took over temporarily. First order of business: nullifying all improperly issued fines. As I left the rec center, Emmy called. Dad, you coming home soon? Yeah, I said, smiling for the first time in days. It's done. Did the bad lady get in trouble? She's not in charge anymore. Cool, she said. Can I build a volcano on the lawn now? I paused. Sure, just keep it under 15 feet. HOA might still have rules about lava. The following Monday, I got a knock at the door just after sunrise. I opened it to find Bernice, the acting HOA vice chair, holding a clipboard and a thin manila envelope under one arm. She looked like she'd aged 10 years over the weekend. Morning, Harrison, she said, eyes scanning the street behind me. Do you have a minute? I gestured her in and led her to the kitchen table. Emmy was already off to school and I hadn't started my shift yet. I poured her a cup of coffee and sat across from her. She slid the envelope across the table. These are the minutes from Saturday night's emergency board meeting. I wanted to give you a copy personally since, well, you kicked the hornet's nest. I opened the flap and skimmed the documents. They were neatly typed, with each motion documented and time-stamped. Whitney's suspension was official. The rest of the board had voted to launch an internal audit. Bernice sipped her coffee. I'll be honest, we should have stepped in sooner, but Whitney, she knew how to keep people off balance, always just within the lines. Or so we thought. She's not used to being challenged, I said, setting down the folder. She made a lot of enemies, I just gave them a place to gather. She gave a slow nod. Well, the city's been asking questions. And the auditor they sent over found something strange on day one. That got my attention. What kind of strange? We'll know more soon, but funds are missing, Harrison. HOA dues that were collected, some of them never made it to the account. I leaned back in my chair. Any idea how much? Bernice hesitated. North of 30,000, maybe more. The treasurer says he never saw those deposits, but Whitney was the only one with the master account access. The air in the kitchen shifted. You filed a police report? I asked. Not yet. We were waiting for confirmation from the city's audit team, but I'm telling you now because, well, there's a chance she tries to shift blame. You should be ready. I nodded. I've got everything backed up. If she tries to drag me into this, she'll regret it. Bernice stood, finished her coffee, and left quietly. I watched her leave, then went straight to my office and pulled out the hard drive where I'd archived all the footage and documents. I made another copy, encrypted it, and uploaded it to a secure folder. 2 days later, the police showed up. Detective Corwin introduced himself at my door, badge clipped to his belt, notepad in hand. He was in his 50s with a tired face and a voice that didn't waste time. I'm looking into irregularities with the Briar Glen HOA's financial records, he said. I understand you filed the initial complaint. I did, I said, stepping aside. Come on in. He walked through without ceremony and sat at the table. I handed him the drive. Every document, every citation I could find, plus photos and witness statements. I also included the footage of her parking in front of my garage last week. Might not seem relevant, but it shows her attitude toward private property. Corwin nodded, plugging the drive into his tablet. We've already started examining the association's bank activity. A number of deposits were made into a secondary account, not listed in their official books. That account was registered in a shell company's name, one that traces back to a P.O. box in the next county. Let me guess, I said. Whitney Naylor's name on the lease. He didn't answer directly. We've issued a subpoena. Once we get the data, we'll know for sure. I folded my arms. What happens if she's guilty? If the amount is what we think it is, it's felony embezzlement. With the city involved, it's going to be hard for her to talk her way out of this. He stood. I may need a statement from you on record. Can I count on your cooperation? Absolutely, I said. Later that week, the neighborhood buzzed with rumors. People whispered about withdrawals, receipts that didn't match the budget, and a set of landscaping contracts that had never been fulfilled despite the HOA paying out for them. It was like peeling back the drywall and finding rot all the way down. On Thursday, I saw Whitney again. She was standing on the corner across from my house, wearing oversized sunglasses and pacing the sidewalk like she was waiting for someone. When I stepped outside to check the mail, her head snapped toward me. "Harrison," she called, voice too sweet. "Got a minute?" I didn't answer. I just kept walking. She crossed the street, heels clicking on the pavement. "We should talk. This whole situation's gotten out of hand." "You mean the situation where you're under investigation for theft?" "I didn't take anything," she said too quickly. "This is a misunderstanding. I had to move those funds temporarily. There were things the board didn't understand, and I couldn't get approval in time. So I acted." "That's not how fiduciary responsibility works," I said, turning to face her. "You used your position for personal gain. And now you're panicking because someone finally held you accountable." "I'm being scapegoated," she hissed. "You think this is about justice. It's about revenge. People like Burness have been waiting for a chance to take me down." I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "You parked illegally, abused the bylaws, and skimmed off the top. This isn't revenge, it's consequences." She flinched, clenched her jaw, and turned away. That weekend, everything came crashing down. The police raided the HOA office, just a small room in the community clubhouse. Word spread like wildfire. Officers carried out boxes of binders, hard drives, and a desktop tower. Residents stood on their porches, watching in silence. Some filmed. No one stepped forward to defend her. When the warrant was unsealed, it revealed everything. Forged invoices, unauthorized transfers, and bank statements routed through a company called Northwood Solutions LLC, a non-existent landscaping firm linked directly to a debit card issued in Whitney's name. The arrest came 2 days later. Quiet. Professional, no cuffs in front of cameras. But everyone knew. Burness held an emergency meeting that night and announced a full restructuring of the board. They would begin rewriting the bylaws with public oversight and bring in a third-party financial consultant. The community cheered. After the meeting, Lewis approached me, hands in his coat pockets. "You ever think about joining the board?" he asked. I raised an eyebrow. "You serious? You've got the records, the follow-through, and you don't take crap from people in beige Lexuses. We could use that." I shrugged. "Let's see how things settle. But yeah, maybe." As we walked back toward our homes, the street felt different, lighter. Like the air had shifted and the neighborhood had finally remembered who it belonged to. I looked at my driveway, now blissfully clear, and smiled. No more yellow citations. No more whispered threats. Just neighbors, finally building something better. Together. Less than a week after Whitney's arrest, Briar Glen felt like a completely different neighborhood. People who used to keep their heads down and avoid eye contact at the mailbox were now waving, chatting, even laughing. The tension that had clung to our streets like humidity in July had finally lifted. I was back in my garage, sorting through old paint cans when I got a call from Detective Corwin. "We finished analyzing the financial trail," he said, his voice more clipped than usual. "There's something you need to see. Can you come down to the precinct this afternoon?" I didn't ask questions. I just said yes. The precinct was a squat brick building downtown, all gray walls and fluorescent lights. Corwin met me in the conference room, a stack of files already waiting. He nodded toward the chair across from him and slid a folder forward. "You were right to be suspicious," he said. "But it's worse than misappropriation. A lot worse." I opened the folder and scanned the contents. Bank records, document scans, and tucked in the back photos. Not of Whitney, but of a man I didn't recognize, standing beside a row of newly installed surveillance poles. "That's Charles Dyer," Corwin said. "He's a contractor from Glenmark Security Systems. Whitney hired him last year personally to install perimeter cameras around the HOA clubhouse and half a dozen other properties in the neighborhood. Except, according to the city's telecom records, none of those installations were ever permitted or registered." I frowned. "So they were put up illegally. Worse," he said. "They weren't just cameras, some of them had audio surveillance. And 3 of the poles were aimed directly at private homes, 2 of which belonged to board dissenters who'd voted against Whitney's proposals last fall." I leaned back, trying to wrap my head around it. "She was spying on people," Corwin nodded. "We recovered footage from one of the hard drives seized during the clubhouse raid. Over 100 hours of recordings, conversations on porches, inside open windows, even backyard meetings. She was gathering leverage." I flipped to the next page, where a timeline had been laid out in precise detail. Each video file was time-stamped, cataloged, and cross-referenced with internal HOA meeting notes. Several clips had been transcribed snippets of private conversations that had somehow ended up influencing board votes. "She used this information to silence opposition," Corwin said. "In at least 2 cases, she threatened to release footage if certain votes didn't go her way." I scanned a transcript where a board member had spoken with his daughter on their porch about refinancing their mortgage. The next week, he'd suddenly flipped his stance on a proposed dues increase. It wasn't hard to see the connection. "Is this enough for a wiretapping charge?" I asked. "Already in motion," he said. "We've added illegal surveillance and coercion to the list. She's facing up to 15 years if convicted." I sat silently for a moment, letting it sink in. "Also," Corwin said, flipping to another document, "we found something else. That landscaping company, Northwood Solutions, Whitney didn't act alone." He laid down a recent bank statement showing transfers from the Shell account to another name, Gregory Vance, treasurer. The same man who'd claimed ignorance in the emergency meeting. "He's been cooperating," Corwin said. "But only because he thought we wouldn't find this. We're picking him up this evening." I stood. "You need anything else from me?" "Not today," Corwin said, "but keep your phone on. The DA might want to interview you before the indictment is finalized." I left the precinct with a strange mixture of relief and something darker disgust, maybe. Not just at Whitney, but at how far she'd gone before anyone stopped her. She hadn't just abused power. She'd turned our HOA into a private surveillance machine. Back at home, I found a letter taped neatly to my front door. It was from Bernice. Inside was a simple note, handwritten in careful script. "Board elections will be held on the 15th. Nominations are open. I hope you'll consider." I didn't respond right away. I needed time to think. That evening, I walked past the clubhouse on my way to Lewis's. The building was quiet, locked up tight. A notice had been posted on the door, "Closed pending investigation." The security cameras had been removed. Only the empty brackets remained, like bones picked clean. Lewis was waiting on his porch, 2 cold beers already open. "You hear about Vance?" he asked. I nodded. "She wasn't working alone," he leaned back. "Makes sense. No one pulls off something that big without help." We sat in silence for a while, watching the sun dip behind the rooftops. Kids were riding bikes down the middle of the street, and someone had fired up a grill a few houses down. It felt like the neighborhood had finally taken a deep breath after holding it for too long. "You gonna run for the board?" Lewis asked. "I'm thinking about it." "You should," he said. "We need someone who knows where the bodies are buried." I laughed. "Hopefully we've dug most of those up already." The next week, the community gathered again, this time not intention but purpose. The rec center was packed, and for the first time, residents weren't there out of fear or obligation. They were there because they cared. Bernice opened the floor for nominations. I waited until the third call before raising my hand. When the ballots came back an hour later, I had been elected chair by a landslide. I didn't give a speech. Just nodded, thanked the room, and promised one thing: transparency. The first thing we did was freeze all HOA discretionary spending until a full audit could be completed. Then we drafted a resolution to prevent any board member from having sole access to association funds. Every transaction would now require 2 signatures and a public record. We also voted to install a resident review committee, 5 volunteers from the neighborhood who'd be given access to board discussions and could raise objections before any vote. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. A few weeks later, I stood in front of the same garage Whitney had once blocked, watching my daughter build a model trebuchet with pool noodles and duct tape. A neighbor walked by, smiled, and waved. No citations, no threats, just a quiet street finally at peace. When the DA's office released the official charges: embezzlement, wire fraud, illegal surveillance, and coercion, it made the local news. Whitney's trial was scheduled for the fall. Vance had turned state's witness in exchange for a lighter sentence. The rest of the board resigned quietly. I never went to the courthouse. I didn't need to. Justice wasn't in the conviction. It was in the way our neighborhood reclaimed itself. No more secret cameras. No more rubber-stamped fines. Just people, imperfect but trying, working together again. And every time I pull into my driveway now, I glance at the open curb and feel a quiet satisfaction. Because that spot, it's mine.